At the university cafe, everyone saw her as just a slow old waitress. Students showed impatience with their orders. Managers criticized her pace. But when an accident happened at the cafe, her medical intervention shocked everyone. Because that woman had performed heart surgery for 35 years, saving thousands of lives as a renowned doctor. Welcome to Human Stories. Before we begin this incredible story of hidden expertise, precision under pressure, and forgotten excellence, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor these quiet heroes. Dr. Margaret Sullivan had been serving coffee and sandwiches at Columbia University's Morningside Cafe for 3 years now. And most days, she felt like she was completely invisible. At 67 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, she moved through the bustling campus cafe like a gentle ghost that nobody really noticed. The college students rushed past her with barely a glance, impatient for their caffeine fix between classes. The younger staff members treated her like a relic from another era. The manager spoke to her with the condescending tone reserved for employees who were considered past their prime. What none of them knew was that Dr. Margaret Sullivan had spent 35 years as one of New York's most respected cardiac surgeons. She'd performed over 6,000 heart operations, pioneered several surgical techniques, and served as chief of cardiac surgery at NewYork-Presbyterian Hospital for 12 years. But that was her old life. Now she was just Maggie, the careful waitress who took a little too long with orders and asked too many questions about dietary restrictions. It was a busy Wednesday afternoon in October, and the cafe was packed with students cramming for midterms. The air buzzed with the nervous energy of coffee-fueled study sessions, animated discussions about upcoming exams, and the constant hum of laptops and conversation. Margaret was working the counter, methodically taking orders and ensuring each student got exactly what they requested. Her approach was thorough. She double-checked every modification, confirmed allergies, and made sure each drink was prepared to perfection. "Excuse me, can you please hurry up?" said Jake Morrison, a junior pre-med student, tapping his fingers impatiently on the counter. "I have organic chemistry in 10 minutes. Margaret looked up from carefully writing his order. "Just want to make sure I get this right. You said oat milk, 2 shots of espresso, and a dash of cinnamon, correct?" Yes, whatever. Just make it fast." Behind Jake, a line of equally impatient students was forming. Margaret could feel their frustration, but after 3 decades of surgery, she'd learned that precision mattered more than speed. A mistake in the operating room could cost a life. A mistake with a coffee order just meant disappointment, but the principle was the same. Margaret called Amanda Torres, the 28-year-old cafe manager, from across the counter. "Pick up the pace. We've got customers waiting." Margaret nodded and began preparing Jake's latte with the same methodical care she'd once brought to complex cardiac procedures. Every movement was deliberate, every measurement exact. "This is ridiculous," muttered Sarah Chen, a sophomore psychology major standing behind Jake. "It's just coffee, not brain surgery." If only she knew, Margaret thought to herself. As Margaret handed Jake his perfectly prepared latte, she noticed something that her years of medical training had taught her to recognize. Jake was sweating despite the cool October weather. His face was slightly pale and he was unconsciously rubbing his left arm. "Are you feeling all right, dear?" Margaret asked quietly. Jake waved her off dismissively. "I'm fine, just stressed about the exam." But Margaret's trained eye caught something else. Jake's breathing was slightly labored, and there was a tightness around his eyes that she'd seen thousands of times before in cardiac patients. "Have you been experiencing any chest pressure or discomfort?" she asked gently. "What?" Jake looked annoyed. "Lady, you're a coffee server, not a doctor. I'm fine." Margaret watched him walk to a corner table, her medical instincts on high alert. Something wasn't right. She continued serving customers but kept glancing over at Jake. He was trying to study, but she could see him shifting uncomfortably in his chair, occasionally touching his chest. 20 minutes later, Margaret was carrying a tray of drinks to a table when she heard a commotion from Jake's corner. He had pushed back from his table and was clutching his chest, his face now visibly pale and sweating profusely. I can't breathe," Jake gasped to his study partner. "Something's wrong." Margaret immediately set down her tray and moved toward him with a speed and purpose that surprised everyone in the cafe. Her entire demeanor changed. The quiet, methodical waitress disappeared, replaced by someone who clearly knew exactly what she was doing. "Everyone step back," Margaret said with calm authority as she knelt beside Jake's chair. "Give him room to breathe." She quickly assessed Jake's condition with the systematic precision of someone who had done this thousands of times. Pulse rapid and irregular, skin pale and clammy, difficulty breathing, classic signs of cardiac distress. "Jake, I need you to listen to me," Margaret said, her voice steady and reassuring. "You're having a heart episode. I'm going to help you. You're just a waitress," Jake wheezed. "Actually," Margaret said as she loosened his collar and helped him into a better position, "I'm a doctor, a cardiac surgeon, retired, and right now, you need to trust me." The cafe had gone silent. Every student, every staff member was staring at the woman they'd dismissed as just the coffee lady as she took complete command of a medical emergency. Margaret turned to Sarah, who was standing nearby with her mouth open. "I need you to call 911 immediately. Tell them we have a 20-year-old male experiencing cardiac distress, possible myocardial infarction." "A what?" Sarah stammered. "Heart attack," Margaret said, simply, never taking her eyes off Jake. "Call now." As Sarah fumbled for her phone, Margaret continued her assessment. She checked Jake's pulse at multiple points, observed his breathing pattern, and gently palpated his chest and abdomen. "Jake, do you have any family history of heart problems?" she asked while monitoring his condition. My dad had a heart attack at 45, Jake managed to say. Margaret nodded. "Any drug use, stimulants, excessive caffeine?" Jake's face flushed with embarrassment. I've been taking Adderall, not prescribed, for studying, and I've had like 6 espresso shots today." "How much Adderall?" Margaret asked without judgment. Maybe 40 milligrams this morning." Margaret's expression grew more serious. "Jake, you're experiencing what we call stimulant-induced cardiac stress. The combination of unprescribed amphetamines and excessive caffeine has put dangerous strain on your heart." Amanda, the manager, approached hesitantly. "Margaret, are you really a doctor?" "Dr. Margaret Sullivan," Margaret replied while keeping her focus on Jake. "Chief of cardiac surgery at NewYork-Presbyterian, retired 3 years ago. 35 years of practice, over 6,000 cardiac procedures. The entire cafe was now gathered in a circle around them, but Margaret's attention was entirely focused on her patient. She was doing what she had done for thousands of emergencies, staying calm, assessing systematically, and providing care. The good news, Jake, is that you're young, and this appears to be stress-induced rather than a structural heart problem. But we need to get you to a hospital for monitoring and to ensure there's no damage. Jake's breathing was becoming more regular under Margaret's calm guidance. "Am I going to be okay?" "You're going to be fine," Margaret said with the confidence of someone who had guided patients through much worse. "But this is a warning. Your heart is telling you to make some changes." The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Margaret looked up to see paramedics entering the cafe with their equipment. "Over here," she called out. 20-year-old male, stimulant-induced cardiac stress. Pulse 120 and irregular. BP appears elevated, responsive, and oriented. The lead paramedic approached and immediately recognized Margaret's professional demeanor. "Are you medical personnel, ma'am?" "Dr. Margaret Sullivan, cardiac surgeon, retired. I can give you a full assessment." As the paramedics took over Jake's care, Margaret provided them with a detailed medical handoff that impressed everyone listening. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her observations precise, and her communication flawless. "Dr. Sullivan," the paramedic said as they prepared to transport Jake, "would you like to ride with us? Your assessment has been incredibly helpful." Margaret looked around the cafe, where dozens of students and staff were staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to embarrassment. "I need to finish my shift," she said simply. As the paramedics wheeled Jake out on a gurney, he grabbed Margaret's hand. "Dr. Sullivan, thank you. I'm sorry I was rude earlier. I had no idea." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "You couldn't have known, dear. Just take care of yourself. And maybe stick to 1 cup of coffee a day from now on." After the ambulance left, the cafe remained unusually quiet. Margaret calmly returned to the counter and began cleaning up as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Amanda approached her slowly. "Margaret?" "Dr. Sullivan. I don't understand. And if stories like this remind you that remarkable people serve us in unexpected ways, subscribe to Human Stories. We're here to honor the everyday heroes who continue caring for others long after they've hung up their professional credentials. See you in the next story. You're one of the most famous cardiac surgeons in New York. I looked you up on my phone. Why are you working here?" Margaret continued, wiping down the counter. "Because I like it here. I like helping people, even if it's just making their coffee the way they like it. But you could be consulting, teaching at the medical school, making a fortune." Margaret smiled. "I did that for 35 years. Now I wanted to do something different, something quiet." Sarah, the psychology student who had been impatient earlier, approached hesitantly. "Dr. Sullivan, I'm pre-med. Could I ask you some questions about cardiac surgery?" "Of course, dear. But first, let me make you a proper coffee. And please, call me Maggie." Over the next hour, word spread through the campus like wildfire. The slow coffee lady at Morningside Cafe was Dr. Margaret Sullivan, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. Students began arriving not just for coffee, but for the chance to meet her. But Margaret handled the attention the same way she'd handled everything else, with quiet grace and genuine care for each person who approached her. Dr. James Rodriguez, a professor from the medical school, arrived within 2 hours of hearing the news. "Maggie, what the hell are you doing serving coffee? Do you know how many people have been looking for you since you disappeared from Presbyterian?" Margaret handed him a perfectly brewed espresso. "I didn't disappear, James. I retired. There's a difference. But working in a cafe? I'm still helping people," Margaret said simply. "Just in a different way." Jake returned to the cafe 2 days later, with a clean bill of health and a completely different attitude. He approached Margaret with obvious embarrassment and gratitude. "Dr. Sullivan, the doctors at the hospital said you probably saved my life. If you hadn't recognized what was happening..." Margaret looked up from preparing a latte. "You saved your own life by listening when your body was telling you something was wrong. I just helped you understand what it was saying." "I've quit the Adderall," Jake said, "and I'm limiting myself to 1 coffee a day." "Good choices," Margaret nodded approvingly. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Scared, but better." "Dr. Sullivan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you leave surgery to work here?" Margaret considered the question while she finished his drink. "Jake, for 35 years, I spent my days in operating rooms, dealing with life and death situations, managing crises, and living under constant pressure. It was rewarding, but it was also exhausting." And she handed him his coffee. "Here, I get to interact with bright young people like you. I get to make sure everyone gets exactly what they need. And occasionally, when someone needs more than coffee, I can still help with that, too." Jake smiled. "So you didn't really retire from medicine?" "No," Margaret said, returning his smile. "I just found a different way to practice it." 3 months later, Margaret was still working at Morningside Cafe, but everything had changed. Students now sought her out for informal medical advice and mentoring. The university had offered her a consulting position with the medical school, which she accepted on a part-time basis. She still served coffee with the same methodical care, but now students appreciated her precision instead of criticizing it. They understood that when Dr. Margaret Sullivan took time to get something right, it was because she'd learned that details matter. The cafe had become an unofficial gathering place for pre-med students who would study there hoping for a chance to learn from one of the most accomplished surgeons of her generation. But Margaret's favorite part of the job remained the same. The moment when she handed someone exactly what they needed, whether it was a perfect cup of coffee or a life-saving medical intervention. Some people retire from their careers and spend their days playing golf or traveling the world. Others find new ways to use their skills and continue serving their communities. Dr. Margaret Sullivan never needed anyone at Columbia to know about her 35 years saving lives at New York-Presbyterian. She wasn't looking for recognition or respect in her cafe job. She was simply finding a new way to care for people. The medical knowledge was still there when it was needed. The steady hands were still ready to help in a crisis. But most days, they were content to prepare the perfect cup of coffee and ensure that stressed students got exactly what they needed to get through their day. Real expertise doesn't disappear when you change careers. It just finds new ways to serve. Have you ever discovered that someone working quietly around you had an extraordinary professional background? Someone whose hidden expertise surprised you when it mattered most? Share their story in the comments below. And if stories like this remind you that remarkable people serve us in unexpected ways, subscribe to Human Stories. We're here to honor the everyday heroes who continue caring for others long after they've hung up their professional credentials. See you in the next story.